Hey everybody, welcome back. We are going to be starting chapter 15 today, and really my goal is to finish chapter 15 and 16 in 4 videos. So I'm going to try to get to the point. I'm going to try to not drag on slides for too long, and hopefully I don't talk too fast. But as always, the real reason that you come here, the joke of the day. So today's joke, because we're doing with the court system, is going to be about the court. So you guys know what's the difference between a good lawyer and a great lawyer? A good lawyer knows the law. A great lawyer knows the judge. So as always, take it in, but now we get back to POD. So we're going to start this chapter by talking about the functions of law and why they exist. And I think most of these are going to be pretty self-explanatory, pretty easy to understand. And there's really 2 major themes to the functioning of a law, and that is define what is and what is not permissible. Which, you know, a lot of times we know what the law is, but people still willingly break the law. And, you know, one example I always use in class is speed limits. Everybody knows what a speed limit is if they're driving down to Bismarck on 49 at 65 miles an hour. I'm willing to say the majority of you probably go, 67, 68, kind of right in there, pushing the speed limit a little bit. But that technically is breaking the law. And why we need to have laws. I think the best quote I can use for this comes from the Federalist Papers, Federalist number 51, where James Madison said, "If men were angels, no government would be necessary." So what he means by that is if everybody knew what was proper, knew what was best, and did what's best for society, we wouldn't need laws. But people knowingly break laws. So because of that, they need to define what is and what is not permissible for our society. And then with that, the other function of law is to set punishments meant to discourage potential criminals. Now, these are done in multiple ways, whether it's jail time, whether it's a fine. Thinking specifically about where we are with North Dakota and speed limits, I'd say the punishment in North Dakota for speed limits really doesn't discourage potential speeders. It doesn't, because a $20 fine really doesn't make you think, well, I need to slow down. And states do that for a specific reason. Sometimes they don't think that they really want to make profit off of people driving fast. Example that I was once told was in Montana when it was 65 miles an hour. This one individual teacher I had said when they drove through Montana, they were going about 25 miles over the speed limit. And when they got pulled over, the police officer said, well, you're going a little too fast. You got to slow it down a little bit. So because of that, I have to fine you. And do you want to pay your fine now or at the courthouse? And he said, I'll pay it now, and handed the officer a $5 bill. And then they said, all right, well, have a good rest of your day. So, punishments are meant to discourage criminals. I think jail time is probably a little bit more prominent than a $20 fine. But those are the basic functions of a law. Now, what are characteristics of a good law? And we'll use speed limits as an example once again. Fair to everybody. Well, this one I think is pretty clear. You know what the speed limit is. You know if you're driving too fast the majority of the time. So because of that, well, I think that one's fair. A reasonable punishment. Now, $20... Again, I don't think it really deters you, but, other states, you use the Montana example, but one time when I was driving with my brother, he wanted to do a U-turn at a stoplight, and I told him, nope, you can't do that. This is illegal in Wisconsin. He said, no, it's not posted. I was taking driver's ed, so I knew it was illegal, so he's halfway through the turn, and cop flips his lights on. And he gets pulled over, and he gets fined about $300, and he gets points taken off of his license. Now, is that a reasonable punishment? He definitely knew the law after that, so I'll let you determine whether or not you think that that's going to be reasonable or not. So, but, a $20 fine for speeding probably would be a reasonable punishment. Understandable by the public. Again, we know what it is. It's pretty easy to understand. And then the last one, is it enforceable? So can police, can state troopers, can local sheriffs, can they enforce it? Absolutely, they can. Now, we'll use an example of a different law, that you cannot make fun of Mr. Zahn and say that these videos are awful. Now, is that fair to everybody? Probably not. But I think it's fair. Absolutely. Please don't make fun of me. And if you break this law, you are suspended for 5 days. Now, is that reasonable? Probably not. Does the public understand that law? I would say yes. It would be pretty understandable if that was a actual law. And then, is it enforceable by community, state, or federal authorities? Absolutely not. They're not going to just go around trying to listen to what people are saying and see if they're making fun of me. So because of that, that would probably not be a good law. Not probably. That would be a really bad law. But please don't make fun of me. Now it's going to be broken up into two different types of law. We have criminal and we have civil law. Now the idea of criminal law is to prevent people from deliberately or recklessly harming one another or someone's property. So within that, you always have the government being the plaintiff, whether it's the United States, whether it's North Dakota, whether you use an example of Texas versus Johnson, government is always going to be the plaintiff. The accused individual is always the defendant. So in Texas versus Johnson, this went to criminal court, whether or not you could burn a flag as a form of protest. So that's where we kind of get the two different sides, where you get a plaintiff and a defendant. And in the next, I think it's 2 videos from now, we'll talk about the different procedures for criminal law. And then the overall idea of criminal law is that society is a victim when a crime is committed. So, if there's a federal lawsuit where it's going to be someone was murdered, yeah, society would be a victim. The Texas versus Johnson case, they thought society was a victim because people were upset and people were outraged that somebody would do that to something that has such a value to American society. But that's going to be criminal law. In our criminal law system, we have something that's known as an adversary system. So kind of breaking that down, adversary, you have 2 different sides, you have 2 different opponents. And in these types of cases, you have lawyers who are going to present their strongest case. Now, most of the time, the judge is going to have an impartial role. Basically, they're just going to be there to determine whether or not that there's going to be an objection, whether or not evidence can be used. And they just make sure that the court runs as smoothly as possible, and then a jury makes the final decision or determination of whether or not a person is innocent or guilty. Now, with an adversary system, there are some critics and defenders of it. Some people say that an adversary system isn't good because if you are wealthy and you're able to afford a good lawyer, you're going to be able to get away with a lot more than somebody who makes $5,000 a year. So that's going to be the critic side of it. The defenders are going to say, well, is it their fault for hiring a lawyer like that? It's hard to decide which way is going to be best. But just know that there is an adversary system. In other countries, like in a lot of them in Europe, they don't have an adversary system. They just have it to where the judge makes the decision. I mean, both sides make the argument to the judge, and the judge says innocent or guilty. And then with criminal law, the most common, I don't want to say popular, but the most common are going to be crimes against property. So arson, if you burn someone's house down, vandalism, if you go spray paint, or I don't know if toilet papering someone's trees would count as that. I'm sure it probably wouldn't in criminal law, but property being destroyed is going to be the most common aspect of criminal law. And then, not just being destroyed, but also taken against an owner's will. So you have theft, you have larceny, you have burglary. And I'll tell you, one of the big differences between the two is larceny, you don't have to enter a building for it. Burglary, you have to actually enter somebody's home, enter a business to steal a candy bar or something like that, where larceny can be stealing somebody's bike, stealing a vehicle that somebody left unlocked or locked. But that's going to be the different aspects of criminal law. Now we get to civil law. And civil law is going to be different because you're not trying to make somebody go to prison. In civil law, you are mostly suing for money. So it happens if you have disputes between people or groups of people. It's not necessarily viewed as a threat to society. It's more viewed as a threat to your own personal well-being. So anytime you hear of a civil case going to court, it's going to be called a lawsuit. But really, the big thing in this one is you have a plaintiff. You have the person trying to sue for damages. So if you see my car parked on the side of the road and you're like, man, I really don't want to keep watching these types of videos. I really don't want to keep doing work in POD. So I'm just going to hit Mr. Zahn's car. Well, I could sue you and that would be a lawsuit, and I could be suing you for damages. So I could be suing you for damages for my vehicle. A lot of times what also happens in these civil cases, if people say that they're suing for emotional damages because that car, boy, that was the first car that I bought, and I remember everything about that day, and it really has a lot of emotional value and sentimental value to me. So I'm going to sue you for emotional damages as well. But that's going to be the example of civil law. There are other types of law that are going to be concerned. We really aren't going to get too much into detail on these, but just know the other major ones are going to be constitutional law. So anytime that you're suing that the government has tried to infringe upon your rights, whether freedom of speech, anything that they have listed within the Bill of Rights or the constitutional amendments, you are going to be able to sue over those. And then we'll stop here, and we'll pick up on the next video with talking about the different protections that the U.S. Constitution provides for us.